The secret inside this bundle. What a poor family found changed their lives forever. A simple life, a big secret. It was just another ordinary morning in the Moore household, where life had a rhythm that felt both comforting and unyielding. Sarah Moore, a hard-working mother of 3, rose with the sun as she had done for the past several years since her husband's passing. With every day that passed, she learned to manage the weight of loss, and though the burden never truly left her, she kept moving forward, always thinking of her children first. Ethan, her 10-year-old son, was already up, his eyes wide with determination as he helped his 2 younger siblings, Noah and Lily, prepare for the day ahead. Ethan had always been mature for his age. After the death of his father, he stepped in to take on more responsibility than most children his age. It was as though he could sense the weight Sarah carried on her shoulders, and he silently assumed the role of protector for his younger siblings. Today was no different. He had already made sure his younger brother Noah didn't forget his schoolwork, and that Lily, the 6-year-old, had brushed her hair. "Mom, do you need help with anything before you leave for work?" Ethan asked, his voice betraying a hint of concern as he looked up at his mother while she packed her bag for her early shift at the local diner. Sarah smiled softly, grateful for his understanding. "Thanks, honey, but I think I can handle it. You and Noah look after Lily, okay?" she replied, running a hand through his messy hair. The little house they lived in was small, humble, but full of love. It had once been a home for her and her late husband, John, but now it only housed her and the children. The roof leaked when it rained, the windows rattled in the wind, but they made do. Sarah often said, "We'll make do, we always do," even as the walls creaked with the weight of their struggles. As Sarah went through the motions of her morning routine, Ethan quietly slipped outside to tend to their small garden. It wasn't much, just a few vegetables and herbs, but it was their lifeline, a way to make do with what they had. The garden had been her husband's pride and joy before he died in a car accident 2 years ago. He had always believed in growing their own food, and Sarah, despite the many obstacles, had kept up with the tradition. While Ethan worked in the garden, Sarah finished her breakfast. Noah and Lily, still in their pajamas, sat at the kitchen table eating their cereal. They were loud and full of energy, their voices filling the small space with life and love. Sarah looked at them, her heart swelling with pride and love, despite the hardships they faced. When Sarah finished her meal, she kissed each child on the forehead and headed out the door, her mind already full of the long shift ahead. She worked at the diner from morning until late afternoon, a job that barely covered the bills, but it was all she could manage. She didn't mind the hard work. It gave her a sense of purpose, a way to feel like she was doing something, anything to provide for her family. And yet every night when she returned home, she found herself wondering if there would ever be a time when they would be able to afford more than just the essentials. But today was different. As Sarah walked out of the house, her eyes caught something unusual at the edge of their property. A bundle of something wrapped in a cloth lay half hidden in the tall grass. It wasn't there yesterday. She took a cautious step forward, her heart suddenly racing. Had someone left something behind? Or perhaps it was a stray animal. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves on the trees, and the sky was clouded with the promise of rain. Curiosity got the best of her, and she moved closer to the bundle. With her heart pounding in her chest, she bent down to untie the fabric, revealing what lay inside. At first she thought it was a large bag, but as she unfurled it, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, wrapped carefully in a soft woolen blanket, was something far beyond what she had expected. A small wooden box, intricately carved, sitting on top of an old yellowed letter. For a moment she could only stare at it in disbelief. A wooden box, a letter. Who would leave something like this out here, just beyond the edge of their property? Her hands trembled as she picked up the box, inspecting it for any signs of who might have left it. But there was nothing. No name, no markings. Just the strange feeling that something significant lay inside. "Mom?" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned around to see him standing by the gate, watching her with a worried expression. "Is everything okay?" Sarah quickly hid the box behind her back, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, everything's fine, sweetheart. she said, trying to sound as calm as possible. But inside her mind raced. What was this? Why had it been left here? And why did it feel like the answer to a question she hadn't even asked yet? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Clearly not convinced, but nodded and ran to join his siblings. Sarah stood frozen for a moment longer, staring at the bundle in her hands. She didn't know it yet, but this small, unassuming package would change the course of her family's life forever. With one last glance at the mysterious bundle, Sarah turned and walked toward the gate, her steps heavy with uncertainty. What she had just discovered buried in the quiet of her yard was only the beginning. The letter that changed everything. Sarah sat quietly on the porch, the wooden box resting on her lap, still covered by the soft woolen blanket. The world around her felt still, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover the secret wrapped within Ethan. Noah and Lily were inside, busy with their morning activities, unaware of the mystery that was unfolding just outside their door. She had promised herself she would focus on the children, on making breakfast and getting through another day, but her curiosity was overwhelming. The box felt heavy with anticipation, and the letter inside was the key to understanding something that had been left unexplained for so long. With trembling hands, Sarah slowly untied the twine that secured the box, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she was about to discover, but her instincts told her this wasn't just some forgotten heirloom or discarded trinket. No, this felt different. It felt like a message, like something that had been waiting for her for years. As she opened the box, she was met with the scent of old paper and wood, a mixture of time and history that seemed to pull her deeper into the mystery. The letter was carefully folded, yellowed at the edges, and written in elegant cursive handwriting. The kind of handwriting that suggested the writer had taken great care with every word, as if this message was one that had to be preserved for a time like this, when someone would finally be ready to understand it. Sarah took a deep breath before unfolding the letter, her fingers brushing against the paper gently, as if it might crumble in her hands. She began to read aloud, her voice soft but clear. To my beloved daughter Sarah, if you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to know the truth. What you have always believed about our family, about your life, has been built on a foundation of lies. I know you have questions, but the answers have been hidden from you for reasons that I can no longer explain. What I can tell you is this: you are not who you think you are. Your real family is out there, and it's time for you to find them. The words hit her like a physical blow. She read the letter over and over, each time feeling as though the earth beneath her was shifting. The letter spoke of things Sarah had never known, secrets about her family, truths that had been buried for years. Who had written this? And why was she only now finding out about it? I am sorry, my dear, that I couldn't protect you from this truth for longer, but I had to make choices for you. And those choices were not always easy. You must go to the old cabin by the lake. There you will find the answers you seek. Everything you need to know about your past, about your real family, is hidden there. Go quickly before someone else discovers what you are about to uncover. Sarah's hands shook as she reread the last few lines. The old cabin by the lake. She had heard stories about it when she was younger, stories her mother had told her before she passed away. But they were always filled with mystery, as though her mother was trying to hide something. Sarah had never questioned it until now. What was this truth her mother had kept from her? Why had she never mentioned the cabin? The letter was signed with a name Sarah did not recognize. Evelyn Moore. She gasped as she realized that this was her mother's handwriting. But the name Evelyn Moore meant nothing to her. Her mother had always been Sarah's guiding light, the one constant in her life. Her name, her identity had always been entwined with Sarah's own. Yet here was a name she had never heard before. Confusion, disbelief, and a deep, gnawing fear settled in her stomach. What was going on? Who was this Evelyn Moore? And why had Sarah never known her? The silence of the moment was deafening. Sarah sat there stunned, her mind racing as she tried to process everything she had just read. She looked down at the bundle, at the letter that now felt like a key to a locked door she had never thought to open. The weight of the moment felt almost suffocating. There were so many questions, so many things she didn't understand. After a few minutes of sitting in stunned silence, Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of tenderness. Sarah looked up, forcing a smile, though her heart was heavy. "Yeah, I'm okay, sweetie. Just a lot to think about." She quickly folded the letter and tucked it back inside the box, wanting to keep it hidden from her children for the moment. There was no need for them to be caught up in this mystery yet. Not yet. Ethan stepped closer, his keen eyes noting the intensity in her expression. "What's that, Mom? What did you find?" "Just an old letter," Sarah replied, her voice a little shaky. She didn't want to explain it to him just yet. She needed time to figure it out herself first. Ethan frowned but didn't press. "Okay, Mom. Just if you need help with anything." Sarah reached out and gently squeezed his shoulder. "Thank you, Ethan. But I think this is something I need to figure out on my own." Ethan hesitated, then nodded and returned inside. As she watched him go, Sarah took one last glance at the box and the letter, her heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The time had come for her to go to the cabin by the lake. But what she would find there, she wasn't sure she was ready for. The rest of the day passed in a blur as Sarah's mind kept returning to the letter, the words echoing in her mind. What was the truth her mother had kept from her, and why had she hidden it for so long? Later that evening, after putting the children to bed, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table staring out the window at the darkened sky. She had made a decision. Tomorrow she would go to the cabin, but something in her gut told her that once she walked through that door, everything would change. The truth, beneath the floorboards. The morning after Sarah had discovered the letter, the sky hung heavy with clouds, as though the weather itself sensed the weight of the secrets about to be uncovered. She left early, telling the children she had some errands to run, and promising to return soon. Ethan and Lily, still half asleep, barely registered her departure, but Noah, ever curious, gave her a questioning look as she stepped out the door. "Mom, where are you going?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. Sarah hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. She had grown used to protecting her children from the complexities of her life, but now the need to uncover the truth was stronger than the fear of what it might reveal. She smiled at him softly, hoping to reassure him, even though the knot in her stomach tightened. "I'll be back soon, honey. Just need to take care of something important." "Okay?" Noah's gaze lingered on her for a moment, his bright green eyes full of unspoken questions, but he nodded, trusting her as always. "Okay, Mom. Be safe." Sarah's heart ached as she closed the door behind her. She drove out of the familiar streets of her small town, heading toward the old cabin by the lake. The journey felt long, though it was only a short drive. The weight of the letter of the mysteries it held seemed to make every minute stretch. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she approached the outskirts of town, the trees thickening around her, casting shadows over the road like the looming presence of something old and forgotten. The cabin had always been a subject of curiosity when she was younger, a place her mother had spoken of only in whispers, as though the mere mention of it brought up painful memories. She could recall the occasional mention of the old place by the lake, but never anything concrete, just fragments of conversations that seemed to always fade before they could become something more. As she neared the cabin, her breath quickened. The structure, though worn and weathered with age, still stood strong, perched on the edge of the lake as it had all those years ago. A thin layer of mist clung to the surface of the water, giving the scene an eerie quality. Sarah parked her car beside the cabin and sat there for a moment, trying to steady her nerves. What would she find inside? Would the letter's words be true? And if so, how would it change everything? She thought she knew about her family. Sarah stepped out of the car, feeling the dampness of the earth beneath her boots. The air smelled of pine and wood, rich with the scent of nature that always made her feel a bit more grounded. She walked slowly toward the door, the familiar crunch of the gravel beneath her feet, sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. The door creaked open as she turned the handle and she stepped inside. The inside of the cabin was dim, the windows obscured by years of dust and grime. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and neglected space. Nothing seemed to have changed much since she was a child, except for the layers of dust that now coated the furniture, as though no one had been here for a very long time. She walked through the main room, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Her heart raced as she made her way toward the back of the cabin, to the small room her mother had always kept locked. Sarah had never been allowed inside when she was younger. Her mother had always said it was a place for special things that Sarah wasn't ready to see. But now, with the letter's cryptic message fresh in her mind, Sarah felt an overwhelming need to open that door. The door, much to her surprise, was not locked. She turned the handle cautiously, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside the room was small but filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. It was clear that this room had been used for storage more than anything else in recent years. But as Sarah's eyes scanned the room, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. Against the far wall, there was a large wooden chest, its edges worn and chipped with age. It looked out of place in this forgotten room, almost as if it had been deliberately hidden. A strange instinct told Sarah that this chest was the key to everything, the answer to all the questions swirling in her mind. She moved toward it, her breath shallow as she bent down to unlatch the rusty metal clasp. With a soft click, the chest opened, revealing a stack of old papers, photographs, and various trinkets, but there at the very top was another letter. This one was different from the one she had found earlier. It was newer, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she reached for the letter, tearing it open with trembling hands. The words were written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. Sarah, you found the chest. I knew this day would come. If you are reading this, then you must know the truth. You've always wondered about your father. Now is the time to know. He wasn't just a man I loved. He was part of something much bigger, something you have to understand. If you are ever to know your true purpose, your family isn't just a family. There's a legacy that has been passed down through generations, and you, my dear, are part of it. Please read on, but beware. The path to the truth is fraught with danger. Sarah's head spun as she reread the letter, her mind racing. A legacy. She whispered aloud, her voice barely above a breath. She had always known there was something more to her family than what met the eye. But this was something entirely different. She could feel the weight of her mother's words settle in her chest, and a sudden chill ran down her spine. What legacy? What danger? And why had no one ever told her about it? As Sarah placed the letter down on the chest, she glanced at the photographs and papers underneath. One photograph in particular caught her attention. It was an old picture of a man she didn't recognize standing beside a woman who looked eerily familiar. She leaned closer, squinting at the photograph, her breath catching in her throat as the realization hit her. The woman was her mother, but the man, he was someone she had never seen before, someone who was deeply intertwined with the mystery that had been hidden from her for so long. Her hands shook as she carefully picked up the photograph, her mind reeling. This man, this stranger, seemed to hold the key to her family's past, a past that had been carefully concealed from her, perhaps even from her mother. What was this secret that had been kept locked away for so many years? The room seemed to close in around her as she took in the weight of the photograph in her hand. This was no longer just about curiosity. This was about discovering the truth, no matter what it meant for her future. She stood up, clutching the photograph to her chest. Her mission had become clear. She couldn't just walk away from this. She had to find out who this man was and why he had been hidden from her. And most importantly, she needed to know what danger was waiting for her at the end of this path. With one final glance at the cabin, Sarah turned and walked toward the door. The answers were out there waiting for her, and she wasn't going to rest until she found them. Unraveling the past. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she drove away from the cabin, the photograph clutched tightly in her hand. The fog that had settled over her thoughts seemed to lift slightly, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of urgency. She needed answers, needed to know who this man was, why he had been so important to her mother, and why his image had been hidden from her all these years. She had no idea where to start, but instinctively, she knew she had to go to the town's old library. It was a place she hadn't visited in years, but it had always held a quiet kind of comfort for her. The scent of old books, the rows of dusty shelves, and the librarian. Mrs. Goodwin, who seemed to know everything about everyone in town, gave Sarah the feeling that she might just find the first clue to unlocking the mystery. As she entered the library, the familiar creak of the door echoed through the otherwise silent space. The warmth of the place wrapped around her, and she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she might find. "Hello, Mrs. Goodwin." Sarah greeted the elderly librarian who was busy organizing some books at the front desk. "Ah, Sarah. Back for more reading, I assume," Mrs. Goodwin said with a warm smile looking up from her work. "What can I help you with today?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of how much to share. She had never thought of herself as someone who needed help with secrets, but today everything had changed. "Actually, I need to do some research about my family. I've just discovered something I wasn't expecting." Mrs. Goodwin raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Family, you say? That's quite the topic to dive into. What exactly are you looking for?" Sarah pulled the photograph from her bag, unfolding it carefully, and handed it to the librarian. "This man. I don't know who he is, but I need to find out. He's somehow connected to my mother's past. I have to know who he is." Mrs. Goodwin took the photograph with a knowing glance, and Sarah noticed the faintest flicker of recognition in the librarian's eyes. Mrs. Goodwin muttered to herself, studying the picture closely. "This looks familiar, but I can't quite place it. Let me check a few records." Sarah's heart sank, but she remained hopeful. "You're the best, Mrs. Goodwin. Anything you can find. I would appreciate it." The librarian smiled softly and nodded before heading toward the back of the library, where the old records were kept. Sarah followed, her anxiety rising with each step. She had no idea what the records would reveal, but she had to know. She needed closure, or at the very least an answer to the question that had been haunting her since she found the letter in the cabin. As Mrs. Goodwin flipped through dusty files and ledgers, Sarah paced restlessly. Her eyes scanned the familiar space, now tinged with the bittersweet realization that she might be uncovering something that could change everything she had ever known about her family. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Goodwin returned, holding an old, faded journal in her hands. "I believe I've found something," she said quietly, her voice carrying a sense of finality. "This journal belonged to your mother. It's from the time when she was younger, before she moved away from here." Sarah took the journal from the librarian's hands, feeling the weight of it in her palms. She had heard rumors over the years about her mother's past, whispers of an old life she had left behind when Sarah was born, but nothing concrete. Her mother had never spoken of it, and Sarah had never dared to ask. Now everything was about to change. She opened the journal carefully, flipping through the yellowed pages until one particular entry caught her eye. It was dated nearly 20 years ago, just before Sarah was born. The handwriting was small and neat, but the words carried a gravity that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "I met him today. His name is Alexander. He looks so much like someone I used to know. But there's something about him, something familiar but not. He's asking questions. He's looking for answers just like me. I'm scared to let him in, but I can't help it. He says he's part of my past, part of the legacy I've been hiding. I can't keep running from it. It's time to face it." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she read the words Alexander. The name was like a thunderclap in her mind. This was the man in the photograph, the man who had somehow been intertwined with her family's history in ways she couldn't yet understand. He had been part of her mother's past, but why had he been hidden from her, Mrs. Goodwin? Sarah's voice shook as she spoke. "Do you know anything about this Alexander? Was he from around here?" The librarian's face softened with a knowing look. Though she didn't speak immediately, it was clear she was weighing her words carefully. I knew Alexander, or at least I knew of him. He was a local boy once, but there were rumors, whispers of things no one wanted to acknowledge. The kind of things that get buried in time, forgotten by most, but not by those who remember. Sarah's pulse quickened. What rumors? Mrs. Goodwin sighed, her eyes distant, as though she were reliving memories that were best left untouched. There were stories about Alexander and your mother back when they were young. It's complicated and not something I should delve into lightly. But there's one thing I do know. He was close to your mother. Very close. Too close for some people's liking. They were both young and in love, but there were secrets they kept. Things that might explain why your mother left this town and why she never spoke of him again. Sarah's heart raced as the words sank in. Her mother had been in love with Alexander. The very idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence before her was undeniable. She had to know more. She needed to understand the depths of this mystery that seemed to have been kept from her for so long. I need to find him. Mrs. Goodwin, Sarah said, determination flooding her veins. I have to know what happened between them. What secrets are buried here? The librarian nodded slowly, her eyes filled with empathy. I thought you might say that. There's someone who might know more about Alexander's disappearance. You should speak to Frank Harding. He's an old acquaintance of your mother's. He's the only one left who might still remember him. Sarah felt a sense of both dread and excitement. Frank Harding, she had heard the name before, but she had no idea where to find him. Where can I find him? She asked urgently. He's living just outside of town, Mrs. Goodwin replied. It's a long shot, but he might be able to help you. Just remember, Sarah, some truths are hard to bear. Be prepared for whatever you might uncover. With a nod, Sarah closed the journal, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The next step was clear. She had to find Frank Harding, and with him the answers to the mystery that had been haunting her family for so long. Discovering the full truth. Sarah's heart beat fast as she drove toward the outskirts of town, the weight of the past pressing against her chest. Every turn, every mile that passed felt like she was crossing into an unknown world, one that held the answers to the questions she had spent her entire life avoiding. The photograph of Alexander, the cryptic journal entries, the mysterious letters, all of them pointed to one thing, a truth that had been buried, hidden, and locked away from her. As she neared Frank Harding's house, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. She didn't know what she was going to hear, but she knew that after today, her life would never be the same. She could feel the past coming alive, its shadows stretching across her present, pulling her towards something far bigger than herself. Frank Harding's house stood at the edge of town, a weathered old farmhouse that had seen better days. The fence surrounding the yard was crooked, and the garden, once well kept, now lay abandoned to the weeds. As Sarah parked her car and stepped out, the air felt heavy with the promise of discovery. She could almost hear the ghosts of the past whispering through the rustling trees, urging her to walk forward. She approached the front door, her pulse quickening with each step. She had no idea what she was about to hear, but a strange sense of inevitability hung in the air, as if Frank had been waiting for this moment just as much as she had. The door creaked open, and there stood Frank, a man who had lived through decades of silence and regret, someone who had seen too much of the world's pain. His face was lined with age, and his eyes, though tired, held a sharpness that betrayed a life full of secrets. Sarah, he said, his voice low. You've grown up. I didn't expect to see you here. Mr. Harding, I need to know the truth, Sarah replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. About my mother and about Alexander. I need to know why she left, why she never told me anything. Frank didn't speak immediately. His gaze shifted to the horizon, his eyes distant as though he were weighing whether or not he should share what he knew. The years of silence were thick between them, but Sarah's resolve was stronger. She had come too far to turn back now. Finally, he motioned for her to come inside. his hand resting heavily on the doorframe. "You've come to the right place, I suppose. But be warned, Sarah. The truth you seek is not one you will want to hear." As they sat across from one another, Frank took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The room with its dusty furniture and faded curtains seemed to hold its breath as well, waiting for the words that would change everything. "You see," Frank began, "your mother and Alexander were involved in something much bigger than either of them ever realized. It wasn't just love between them, it was fate. It was family power and history all rolled into one. And it was that very power that drove your mother to leave to protect you from a world that would have consumed you both." Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean? What was it about Alexander's family? Why did he have to disappear?" Frank paused, his gaze shifting toward the window as if the past was suddenly too much to bear. "Alexander wasn't just a boy from this town, Sarah. His family had ties that went back generations, ties to a legacy of influence, of control. Your mother, she was a part of that world too. She didn't want to be, but there was no escaping it. The power, the history, it's in her blood, just like it's in yours." Sarah felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information. But why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she tell anyone? Frank's voice softened as though the weight of the truth was too much to carry. "Your mother was trying to protect you, Sarah. Protect you from the very thing that drove her away from everything she knew. She left because she wanted you to have a chance at a different life. A life that wasn't bound by the shadows of that family's power. She thought she could escape it, but they were always watching. And Alexander, he was caught in the middle." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the pieces began to fall into place. So Alexander didn't just disappear, he was forced to leave. Frank nodded slowly, his face etched with sorrow. Yes, he was part of the family's legacy, but he didn't want to be. He wanted to live his own life, and your mother knew that. She knew that the moment they tried to take him, they'd try to take you too. She couldn't let that happen, so she left him behind, and she left this town, hoping she could keep you safe. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sat back, her mind reeling with the weight of Frank's words. The life she had known, the life she had built with her children, had been a lie. Her mother's choices had been driven by a truth she hadn't been ready to understand, a truth that now seemed to be clawing its way to the surface. "But where is he now?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where did he go?" Frank's eyes darkened. "I don't know. He disappeared after that night after your mother left. Some say he's been watching over you, that he's been keeping an eye on you from a distance. But the truth is, Sarah, your mother never stopped loving him. She never stopped thinking about him. She just did what she had to do to keep you safe." Sarah's heart felt as though it were breaking. Why didn't she ever tell me? Why did she keep all of this from me? Frank looked at her, his eyes filled with compassion and regret. "Because she loved you, because she wanted you to have a normal life. She didn't want you to carry the burden of a legacy that wasn't yours to bear. But now you're old enough to understand, and I think you're ready to hear the rest." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Sarah could feel it too, the weight of the truth of the legacy of the choices that had shaped her mother's life, and in turn her own. The answers were finally within reach, but the question remained. What would she do with them? Frank stood up, his face solemn. "There's more, Sarah, much more. But it's a story that can only be told by the one person who knows it all." "Who?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. Frank's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of hope in them. "You'll have to go to the cabin by the lake. Everything you need to know is there. The final piece of the puzzle is waiting for you." Unraveling the past. The drive back from Frank Harding's house was unlike any journey Sarah had taken before. The world around her felt muted, as if the trees, the sky, and the road beneath her tires were all part of a dream she couldn't wake up from. Each passing moment seemed to stretch on, as though she were moving through a fog of revelation and fear, unable to fully grasp the weight of what she had just learned. Her mind was in turmoil, trying to make sense of everything Frank had said. Her mother, the woman she had always known as a pillar of strength, had lived a life far beyond what Sarah had ever imagined. Alexander had been more than a love from the past. He had been a symbol of a world her mother had desperately tried to escape. The power, the legacy, the ties that bound them to forces beyond their control. They were the very reason Sarah had grown up in a house filled with love but little else. But the answers Frank had given her only led to more questions. The most pressing one: why had her mother left the town so suddenly? Why had she hidden the truth for so long, only to leave Sarah with the legacy of a life she wasn't prepared for? As Sarah drove through the winding streets, her thoughts returned to the cabin by the lake. Frank had told her everything she needed to know was there. The final piece of the puzzle that would explain everything. But what if the truth was more than she could handle? What if the answers she sought would destroy the life she had worked so hard to build? She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. There was no more time for doubt. Sarah had made a decision. She would go to the cabin. She had to. When she arrived home, the familiar creak of the porch steps felt strangely comforting. The sound of her children's laughter coming from the living room was the only thing that felt normal in a world that had suddenly been turned upside down. But even their joyful noise couldn't drown out the echo of the letter of Frank's words, and of the mysterious legacy that loomed over her family. As she entered the house, she paused for a moment at the door, her gaze lingering on the small table where Lily, Noah, and Ethan had left their school bags. It was hard to believe that just this morning everything had been so simple, but now with the weight of the truth pressing down on her, Sarah couldn't help but feel a growing distance between herself and the life she had known. Mom. Ethan's voice broke her from her thoughts. He was sitting on the couch, his legs stretched out, a book in his hands. "Hey, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, forcing a smile. "How was your day?" "Good," Ethan replied, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "Are you okay, Mom? You've been acting kind of different lately." Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain the whirlwind of emotions that had taken hold of her. How could she possibly tell her children about the past that had been kept hidden from them all these years? "I'm okay, honey," she said, her voice steady. "Just thinking about a few things. Nothing for you to worry about, okay?" Ethan didn't seem convinced, but he nodded and returned to his book. Sarah let out a quiet breath of relief, grateful that he hadn't pushed her for more answers. She needed time to figure this all out. Time to process everything she had learned, and most importantly, time to prepare herself for what she would find at the cabin. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, and the weight of the silence seemed to press in on her. She opened the drawer and pulled out the old letter, the one that had started it all. She traced her fingers over the yellowed paper, the elegant cursive handwriting still vivid in her mind. Evelyn Moore, her mother's name. But the woman in that letter was a stranger, a woman who had hidden the truth from Sarah for so many years. "I am sorry, my dear, that I couldn't protect you from this truth for longer, but I had to make choices for you, and those choices were not always easy," Sarah whispered aloud, repeating the words she had read countless times. "You must go to the old cabin by the lake. There you will find the answers you seek." Her heart pounded as she read those words again. It felt as though the letter had been written just for her, as though it had been waiting for this moment for Sarah to finally be ready to face the truth. Tomorrow, she would go to the cabin. The next morning, Sarah woke early. She made breakfast for the children, her movements automatic as she tried to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. Ethan and Noah were busy with their usual morning routine, while Lily chattered happily at the table. But Sarah's mind was already 1,000 miles away, focused entirely on the journey ahead. After kissing her children goodbye, Sarah slipped out the back door, her car parked at the edge of the driveway, ready for the trip that would change everything. The drive to the cabin was short, but it felt like the longest ride of her life. The world around her seemed to fade. the landscape blurring as she steeled herself for whatever awaited her at the end of this journey. As she approached the cabin, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over her. The building, with its weathered exterior and creaking door, seemed almost alive, as though it had been waiting for her all these years. The thick trees surrounding it seemed to whisper, as though trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. But she had no choice now. She had come too far. Sarah parked her car and stepped out, the cool breeze of the lake brushing against her skin. She could smell the damp earth, the scent of pine and moss in the air, and for a moment it felt like she had stepped back in time, back to a place she had once known but had long since forgotten. The door to the cabin creaked open as Sarah stepped inside, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, and the smell of old wood and neglect filled her lungs. She moved through this cabin slowly, each step heavy with the knowledge that she was about to uncover something that had been hidden from her for her entire life. As she reached the back room, the one her mother had always kept locked, Sarah hesitated for a moment. She had never been inside before, but now the key was in her hands, the key to everything. With a deep breath, Sarah reached for the door and slowly turned the handle. The door groaned open, revealing the forgotten space within. The hidden legacy. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the door creaked open. For years, this room had remained locked, both physically and emotionally. Her mother had always kept it hidden from her, as though there was something inside it that Sarah wasn't supposed to see. But now, standing at the threshold, Sarah knew that whatever lay beyond this door would change everything. The legacy that had been kept from her was waiting to be uncovered. The air inside the room was thick with dust, and the scent of old wood and the dim light filtering through the grimy windows did little to reveal the secrets it held. She stepped cautiously inside, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that covered the floor. The room was small, filled with the remnants of years gone by, old furniture, forgotten books, and trunks covered in sheets. But something about this room felt different. It felt important, as though it held the answers to everything she had been searching for. Her heart raced as she moved further into the room, her eyes scanning the space. It didn't take long for her to find it, a large wooden chest tucked away in the corner, half hidden by a worn velvet curtain. The chest was old, its edges frayed with age, but it looked out of place in this forgotten room. It was as though it had been deliberately hidden, waiting for someone to find it. Sarah approached it slowly, her hands trembling as she reached for the rusty metal clasp. With a soft click, the chest opened, revealing stacks of old papers, photographs, and a few trinkets, things that had long been buried under layers of dust and time. But there at the very top of the pile was something that immediately caught her eye. A letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was her mother's. Her heart skipped a beat as she pulled the letter from the chest, her hands shaking. She had never seen her mother write a letter like this, never seen her handwriting in this context. It was as though this letter had been written by someone else, a woman Sarah didn't recognize. With trembling fingers, Sarah carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. The words were written in hurried, almost frantic handwriting, as though the writer had been pressed for time, or perhaps for safety. As she read, her stomach twisted into knots. Sarah. The letter began. I know that you will find this one day, and I hope by then you will understand why I had to leave, but I'm afraid it's time for you to know the truth, everything I've kept hidden from you all these years. The family you think you belong to, the life you've known, none of it is what it seems. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she continued reading, her eyes scanning the words with growing urgency. I made choices for you, choices that were not mine to make. I tried to protect you from a legacy that would have destroyed you, that would have torn you apart. Your father, his death was not an accident. It was part of something larger, something darker than either of us could ever have imagined. And I was involved whether I wanted to be or not. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the words. Her father's death hadn't been an accident. The room seemed to tilt beneath her as she struggled to keep reading. The pieces were falling into place, but they weren't fitting together the way she had expected. "You see, Sarah," the letter continued, "your father was part of a powerful family, one that has controlled so much of our lives. They are the reason Alexander had to leave. They are the reason I had to leave. And now, they are the reason you are being pulled into this. The truth is, you're not just my daughter. You're part of something much bigger. You carry the same bloodline, the same legacy that has haunted our family for generations." Sarah's hands shook as she dropped the letter into the chest, her mind reeling. Her father, Alexander. Everything she had thought she knew about her family had just been turned upside down. She had been living a lie, and now the truth was finally coming to light. The letter mentioned a legacy, one that had been passed down through generations. A legacy of power, of control, of secrets that had been carefully hidden from her. Her mother had tried to protect her, to shield her from it. But in doing so, she had kept Sarah in the dark for her entire life. But why? Why had her mother gone to such lengths to keep this from her? Why hadn't she told her the truth? As Sarah struggled to comprehend the weight of the letter's contents, she felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to know more. The truth was there, hidden in the shadows of her family's past. She had to uncover it no matter the cost. With renewed determination, Sarah began to sift through the rest of the chest's contents. The photographs, the papers, they were all pieces of the puzzle. As she went through them, one by one, her fingers landed on an old photograph yellowed with age. It was a picture of a young woman smiling brightly, standing beside a man Sarah didn't recognize. The man looked familiar, though his face seemed to haunt her as though she had seen him in a dream. She leaned in closer, her heart pounding as she realized who he was. It was the same man from the photograph she had found earlier. The man who had been standing next to her mother. His name was Alexander. This was the man who had once been a part of her life, a part of her family's legacy. But why had he been hidden? Why had he disappeared? The photograph, the letter, the chest full of secrets, everything was leading her to one conclusion. She wasn't just the daughter of Sarah Moore. She was the daughter of a family whose legacy had been buried, whose power had been concealed, and whose truths had been hidden from her. And now it was time for Sarah to confront that legacy, to uncover the truth about her father, her family, and the life she had been living without knowing who she truly was. But even as she held the photograph in her hands, she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The truth would change everything about her mother, about everything she had ever known. And yet Sarah was ready. She had to be. Confrontation and acceptance. The sun was setting as Sarah stood on the porch of the old cabin by the lake, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. The photograph of Alexander still clutched tightly in her hand, the weight of its significance settling deeper into her chest with each passing moment. The cabin had revealed more than she had ever expected. Secrets that had been buried for years, hidden beneath layers of love loss and betrayal. Yet despite everything she had uncovered, Sarah felt no closer to understanding who she truly was. The truth was right in front of her, but it was as though it were still just beyond her reach, elusive and shrouded in darkness. Her mind spun with all the things she had learned. Her mother's hidden past, the legacy of power that had controlled her family, and the mysterious disappearance of Alexander. The question she had carried with her for so long now hung like shadows in the air around her. What had happened to Alexander? Why had he disappeared? And most importantly, what did all of this mean for her future? As Sarah walked back into the cabin, the stillness of the room seemed to close in on her. The chest was still open, the letter from her mother lying on top of the pile of photographs and documents. She couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had come before her. Her mother's choices, her father's legacy, Alexander's disappearance. It all felt like a tangled knot that she couldn't unravel, no matter how hard she tried. But in that moment, Sarah realized something that she hadn't before. This was her story now. The past had shaped her. Yes, but it didn't define her. The decisions her mother had made, the secrets that had been kept, the dangers they had all tried to protect her from. It was all part of the tapestry of her family's history. But Sarah had the power to decide what happened next. She could choose how she moved forward. Taking a deep breath, Sarah closed the chest. The photographs and letters now safely tucked away inside. She had learned enough to understand the truth of her legacy. She was part of something bigger, something powerful, but that didn't mean she had to let it control her. The past could no longer dictate her future. She stepped out of the cabin, her footsteps steady as she made her way down to the lake. The water was calm, its surface reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. Sarah stood at the edge of the shore, her reflection staring back at her, and for the first time in a long time she felt at peace. The truth had been revealed, and while it had been difficult to face, it had also given her the clarity she needed. She had questions still, of course. She needed to know what had happened to Alexander to understand more about the legacy that had shaped her family. But that wasn't her priority anymore. Her priority was her own life, her own future, her children, her home, her peace of mind. These were the things that mattered most now. As Sarah stood there, the cool wind gently tugging at her hair, she made a silent promise to herself. She would never let the darkness of her family's past overshadow the life she was building. She would protect her children, just as her mother had protected her. And if Alexander was out there, if he was still alive, she would find him, but not at the cost of losing herself. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts, and she turned to find Frank Harding standing at the edge of the cabin, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, two people connected by the shared knowledge of a past neither of them had wanted, but both of them had to face. "You've found what you needed." "Then?" Frank asked quietly, his voice thick with years of regret. Sarah nodded slowly. "I have, and I've decided I'm going to keep moving forward. The past is behind me now." Frank studied her for a moment, as though weighing her words. Then he nodded. "You're stronger than I thought. Your mother would have been proud of you." The words hung in the air for a long moment, and Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had spent so long carrying the burden of her family's secrets, trying to understand why things had happened the way they had. But now she realized that the answers she had been searching for weren't as important as the choices she would make moving forward. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady, "for helping me see the truth." Frank smiled sadly. "It's not easy facing the truth, but sometimes it's the only way to truly move on." With one last glance at the cabin, Sarah turned and walked away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The world seemed different now, brighter somehow, as though the weight of the past had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she was ready to face it. As she drove away from the lake, the sun sinking below the horizon, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what would happen next, or what role Alexander played in her life, but she no longer needed to carry the weight of the past with her. She had a new path to walk, one that was hers to choose. And as she looked out at the road ahead, Sarah knew that whatever happened, she would face it with the strength, courage, and love that had always been within her. The legacy of her family might have shaped her, but it would no longer define her. The future was hers to create,